Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to come from the third chapter of Proverbs, the book of Proverbs. And before we delve into the text itself, we want to proceed from the foundation of literary context. Proverbs is a literary device whereby the author cultivates what Ernest Hemingway called the iceberg effect, which is the art of saying much while appearing to say little. So it's really condensed wisdom where each of the words carry more than the sum of their own parts. And you can type in Corey Johnston, Jonah 3 for more on the iceberg effect. But for now, it suffices to say that Proverbs is not unique to the Hebrew culture. Every culture has their version of Proverbs, but what is distinct from the Hebrew version is that they are inspired, that is to say, divinely so. Now, the book of Proverbs carries theological assumptions, but it's not heavy on theological jargon. So what I wish to recommend or encourage, the statistical probability that you're already a committed follower of the way and a committed disciple, if you're actually watching this, is more likely than you're stumbled upon this by curiosity, and you may or may not have skeptical dispositions. But no matter what your level of spiritual maturity is, or even if you're just getting grounded in the faith, especially if you're getting first grounded in the faith, is to make a daily habit of reading, if nothing else, one proverb a day. Now, there are 31 chapters in the book of Proverbs, so in more months of the year have that many days in them, so it makes sense to read at the very least whatever chapter corresponds to that day in the month. And the beauty of this is that with the repetition of practice, you'll notice new things in new ways that'll hit you each time, and you'll develop things you didn't notice the first time reading. So no matter what your state of spiritual maturity, it's a practice I highly recommend. I've been doing it for close to 4 years now. And now, there are theological assumptions in this, namely that the focal point of this chapter is verses 5 through 7, which we're going to get into, but it assumes the existence of a deity and submission to that deity. But we're actually going to start from verse 1 before we get into there. My son, do not forget my Torah, and let your heart watch over my commands. Now, Solomon, the king of the United Monarchy during what historians refer to as the Golden Age of Israel, when it was united and prosperous to unduplicated extents, he wrote this to his son to instruct him on how to be a righteous ruler, and more broadly, how to have daily living insights, practical guidelines for daily living. So it is of benefit to prosperity. Now, it's questionable to what extent he was writing with posterity in mind, but we have to remember that even though everything in the Bible is not written to us, it is very much written for us. You can type in Corey Johnston, 1 Timothy 6 for more on that. And the Torah is the law of Moses, and the Hebrew monarchs were distinct from the majority of the ancient world in that they were subjected to the laws, whereas nearly every other monarch was above the law, and whatever they said on a whim became law, but they were grounded in the writings of a lawgiver who antedated the monarchy, and they were to be wholly subjected to it. So they were very much, our system of government is a nation of laws, not men, very much like the Hebrews were. And for length of days and long life and peace they add to you. Now, the precepts of the book of Proverbs are not promises. They're not ironclad guarantees, but they are principles to be adhered to, which can conceivably, more likely than not, entail blessings. Now, many people are martyred prematurely for the faith, or by sheer accident or sickness or disease. But the more important thing is then adding years to your life is that they'll add life to your years. So just by abiding these precepts can add a qualitative difference as opposed to a quantitative difference, and that's more of an ironclad guarantee. And peace they add to you. Now the peace, the Hebrew word shalom, entails more than the mere absence of conflict. It's really a God-centeredness which gives contentment in all that we are and all that we do. And let not kindness and truth forsake you. Bind them around your neck. Write them on the tablet of your heart. So this is to ingrain them in your inner being, make it very much a part of all that you are and all that you do. And they literally bound them around their necks. I'm not completely sure if I'm saying this correctly, but the Jews carried what were phylacteries. I totally botched that word, but essentially they had the Shema, which was Deuteronomy 6:4-5, which they carried on their personage and beings to give them a constant reminder of one central aspect of the law. That was the Hebrew confession of the faith. Hear, O Israel, Yahweh is one. The Yahweh is one. Thus finding grace and good insight in the eyes of Elohim and man. Now the latter of these two personages, man, are not guaranteed, because the fact is that many people resent the people who walk in the faith, even if they don't shove it in their face. The mere mention of, you don't have to preach from a pulpit, all you have to do is mention that you're a Christian, and you incur innate hostility. That's to be expected, but the Elohim is a guarantee, so we can be man-pleasers or God-pleasers, and in the final analysis, he's the only one who truly, truly matters. So anything that we endure and are subjected to abuse-wise on his behalf and in his name is can compensate for any temporal suffering or persecutions which we endure, which we're all but guaranteed to if we walk in this faith. Trust in Yahweh with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. Now, the Hebrew word trust is more than a merely passive intellectual trust. The word translates as analogous to a defeated soldier submitting to a conquering king, conquering general, or a master submitting to the sovereign. So it has physical implications. So it's not merely a mental trust. And lean not on your own understanding. Now we have an infallible, omniscient being to give us guidance in life. So this is not to discourage our divinely ordained rational capacities or exercising them, but it's ultimately not to place excessive stock in them. We have the infallible wisdom in this book, which is exponentially more wise than anything we can independently conceive. So the trust with all your heart, that means with all your being and your whole totality, with all your, not just your heart, but all your faculties and all their capacities. Acknowledge him in all your ways, and he will make your path straight. Now, many Christians are inclined to claim the promise without honoring the condition of that promise. That is to acknowledge him in all that you are and all that you do. And that is more than mere lip service confession. It's really to act in the manner that's commensurate with his will. And the guidance, he's not obligated to guide us when we deviate from his intended course, when we trust ourselves above him. So that connects to the antecedent passage. And do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear Yahweh and turn away from evil. So whenever we find pride in our independent intellectual inquiries, that's a sure sign that we're headed for trouble. Now, our best thinking, our rationality can betray us. Now, the Greeks valued rationality above spirituality, at least many of their philosophers did. And the flimsy fallacy of human reason is that it's subject to error, whereas that of divinity is very much not. It's completely infallible. He's an omniscient being. That's the attribute of infinite intelligence. So we're to trust in him and not lean on our own understanding. That connects verse 5-7. Do not be wise in your own eyes. That's intellectual conceit, which is truly an act of foolishness in the final analysis. No matter how impressive our accumulation of facts may be, or however we may think they be, they're ultimately far, far inferior to that which is known by the all-knowing maker of heaven and earth. It is healing to your navel and moisturing to your bones. Now, this is more a spiritual remedial quality, yet it's used by physical analogies, but we have to understand that Yahweh frequently uses the known or the relatable, using the physical world to communicate spiritually significant truths. Esteem Yahweh with your goods and with the first fruit of your increase. Then your storehouse shall be filled with plenty, and your vats overflow with new wines. Now this brings to mind an immediate passage, Malachi 3:10, which says if you tithe, which was the 10% of income or substance that you donate to the church or the synagogue or the assembly, it was very much a species of law to the Old Covenant believers, but we who live under the dispensation of grace or the New Covenant, there's no reason not to go above and beyond the 10% when it's required, but it's ultimately not mandated. But there is such a thing as I have yet to meet anyone who's ever tithed that hasn't been blessed or taken care of financially with all they truly, truly need. So you can type in Corey Johnston, Malachi 3 for 110 towards the tail end of that discourse to find more on that. I want to get it through this chapter as far as we are able. So we're going to refrain from talking all that we, at this risk of repeating what we also said. Every discourse connects, just like every verse in every chapter in the Bible connects. We're to live by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of Yahweh. And my son, do not despise the discipline of Yahweh, and do not loathe his reproof. For whom Yahweh loves, he reproves, as the Father the Son, whom he delights in. So there's nothing arbitrary or sadistic about when Yahweh punishes us. It's ultimately to refine us, and it has a remedial aspect. Just as a father, a child who is never disciplined, in the book of Hebrews, chapter 12 is the New Testament equivalent of this passage. They're compared to a bastard. So really tough love is still love nonetheless, and a love which doesn't administer toughness is less loving. Now, a lot of us are inclined to think that a lot of postmoderns, there are passages in Proverbs which say, spare the rod and spoil the child, and a lot of our postmodern standards are inclined to reject anything which may be construed as child abuse. But it is possible to physically strike your child without abusing them. So that's not to be taken to the excess, but spanking or physically abusing, administering discipline is sometimes necessary and proper, so long as it doesn't degenerate into abuse. Now, a simple strike will suffice, whereas beating your child up is clearly constitutes abuse. But I think the Enlightenment thinker Rousseau said, with men use words, with children use force, and ultimately less intelligent people are more inclined to understand only force, and that has a more long-term effect than words alone may do. Blessed is the man who has found wisdom, and the man who gets understanding. Now, this is self-evident. Wisdom is a blessing which leads to other blessings. It's really a wellspring of blessings which leads to correct living. Contemplation is a pleasure in itself. We're to seek the higher nature of man. Now, pleasure consists of more than merely pleasing the senses, but a more advanced or evolved human being will clearly cultivate intellectual pleasure above physical pleasure. For the gain from it is better than gain from silver, and its increase than fine gold. She is more precious than rubies, and your delights are not comparable to her. Length of days is in her right hand, riches in esteem in her left hand. Her ways are pleasant ways, and all her paths are peace. So this is comparing physical or earthly treasure to the incomparable treasure of wisdom, which not only can enable one to attain if their mind happens to be directed on the accumulation of worldly wealth, so long as they don't do it dishonestly or by trickery or deceit, but ultimately the storehouse of wisdom, we become closer to our Maker, whose attributes we are to affect, and he is perfectly wise. We are finite beings incapable of equaling his wisdom, yet we can reflect what the omniscient wisdom that he radiates in our finite ways, and that's ultimately the object of Proverbs. It's a book of wisdom literature, and it's oriented towards wisdom. And I think this is an appropriate point to cut off. That's all the time we have for today. Tune in next time. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.